You are standing in a crowd and everyone around you is silent. It is 1487. The city is enormous, clean, and terrifying. Above you, a temple. On the temple, a man with a stone knife. Nobody here thinks they are watching a murder. They think it is maintenance. The sun, they believe, does not rise for free. Somebody pays. In roughly a century, the Spanish will claim 80,000 died here. Modern archaeologists dug the same ground for decades and found something else. Fewer bodies than the story, and a much stranger reason for all of it. Human sacrifice was never really about gods. Not underneath, anyway. It was about who gets to stand at the top of the stairs. So here's the question that should bother you more than it does. Why would any society kill its own people on purpose in public? People are the most valuable thing a small ancient society owns. Each one carries food, fights, gathers, raises children, and knows things. Killing one is like burning your own granary to prove you have grain. And yet it happened almost everywhere, on almost every continent, repeatedly. Mesopotamia, the Andes, Mesoamerica, North America, the Pacific, the Mediterranean. Different gods, different centuries, no contact, and the same terrible answer. You would think a practice that expensive would die out immediately. Instead, it lasted thousands of years, and it was carefully organized. Scheduled, budgeted, announced in advance, attended by the entire city. Think about that for a second. Somebody planned this on a calendar, which means it was doing a job. The question is what job? It's not one thing, it's never one thing. There are layers here. We will start with a tower of skulls under a Mexico City street. Then we will burn down the numbers you have always been told. Then Mesopotamia, the Andes, and a coastal beach in northern Peru. And at the end, a study of 93 cultures that explains everything. The answer is not what your history teacher told you. Let's go. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the Aztec skull racks. For centuries, they were something Europeans wrote about, and nobody had found one. Then, in 2015, a dig behind Mexico City's cathedral hit something. The archaeologist Raul Barrera and his team were on a narrow city street. What they uncovered was not a rack. It was a tower, curved and deliberate. About 5 meters across, built in phases made of human skulls and mortar. By 2020, the confirmed count had passed 600 skulls. And the archaeologists said plainly that they had not reached the bottom. Now the part that quietly demolishes what most people assume. Everyone pictures captured warriors. Young men taken in battle marched up the steps. In 2025, researchers reported on 214 skulls. Roughly 46% were male. Roughly 37% were female. There were children in the tower too, at least 3 of them. That does not match a story about warriors captured in honorable combat. It matches something colder and more administrative than a battlefield. Hold that thought. First, we have to deal with the numbers. You have probably heard one number about the Aztecs, and only one. 80,400 people, killed at one temple dedication. 4 days. One temple, a number that has been repeated for centuries. It comes from a Spanish friar named Diego Duran, writing around 1581. That is roughly 90 years after the event he is describing. He wasn't there. Nobody writing that number was ever there. Now do the arithmetic, which almost nobody bothers to do. 80,000 people, over 4 days, is about 14 killings every minute. Non-stop. Day and night. Without pause, without rest, without error. The historian Ross Hassig pointed out this is simply not physically possible. The bodies alone would have buried the temple they were dedicating. So what do the bones under Mexico City actually say? One osteologist cataloged every human remain from decades of temple excavation. Across those digs, she counted 1,071 individuals in total. Of those, only about 74 came from clear sacrificial offering contexts. 74. Not 80,000. The gap is not a rounding error. Now careful, that does not mean the Aztecs did not sacrifice people. They did. There is a tower of 600 skulls to prove it. It means the scale was invented by the people who conquered them. A monstrous empire is much easier to destroy with a clear conscience. That's not a metaphor. That's how conquest paperwork has always worked. So we have a real practice wrapped in a fake number for 500 years. And to understand the real practice, you have to leave Mexico entirely. Go back 4,500 years to southern Iraq, a city called and a cemetery that horrified the men who dug it. In the 1920s, Leonard Woolley opened a chamber and stopped. Inside the chamber were dozens of bodies, dressed, arranged, and undisturbed. In the largest chamber, later called the Great Death Pit, 74 attendants, musicians with their instruments, soldiers with their spears, women wearing gold. Woolley decided they had drunk poison and lain down peacefully to sleep. It is a beautiful theory. It survived for about 80 years. In 2007, 2 skulls from went into a hospital scanner. The scans showed fractures, deep, radiating, made by a sharp, pointed object. Not poison, not sleep. Something hard swung by somebody standing behind them. Afterwards, the bodies were heated and treated to slow decomposition. Because the funeral took days, and the dead had to look right, which tells you this was theater, staged for an audience of the living. Somebody wanted the city to see exactly how far a ruler's power reached. Into the grave, past the grave, down through everyone who served. In 1999, 2 archaeologists climbed a volcano in the Andes. Johann Reinhard and Constanza Cerruti went up Lulailaco, 6,700 meters. It is the highest archaeological site anybody has ever found on Earth. Under the summit, they found 3 children, frozen and almost perfectly preserved. A boy about 5, a younger girl, and a girl about 13. The oldest one is known as the Maiden, and she changed the story because her hair kept a record of the last 2 years of her life. Hair grows slowly, and it locks in whatever you eat and drink. In 2013, a Bradford University team read that record, month by month. About a year before she died, her diet suddenly changed. She started eating the food of the elite. Maize, meat, better everything. She was being fattened for the mountain, and she was being told. In her final months, 2 other things climbed steadily in her hair: coca and alcohol, both peaking in the last weeks of her life. When they found her, there was still a wad of coca in her cheek. Now here is the uncomfortable question that nobody enjoys asking. Was she willing? Or was she simply too sedated to refuse? The honest answer is that the hair cannot tell us her mind. It can only tell us that somebody made a plan and kept to it. 600 kilometers north, on a windy beach in Peru, it gets worse. The site is called Huanchaquito, and archaeologists uncovered it around 2011. The Chimu people buried something here around 1400 before the Inca came. By the time the peer-reviewed count was published, the total was staggering. 137 children, 200 llamas, 3 adults. Most of the children were between 8 and 12 years old. The llamas were mostly young too. Everything chosen was young. Radiocarbon dating puts the whole event within a single terrible window. The sand under the bodies was thick, wet mud when they were buried, which means it had been raining, hard, in one of Earth's driest deserts. The sea had warmed, the fish had gone, and the crops were drowning. So the Chimu gave the sea the most valuable thing they owned. Not gold, not grain. Their children and the next generation of llamas. That is what a society does when it is completely out of options. Now, cross an ocean and a continent to Illinois. 1,000 years ago, Cahokia was the largest city north of Mexico, and it built mounds. Inside one mound, excavators found a burial covered in 20,000 shell beads. The beads were laid out in the shape of a falcon, deliberately. For decades, everyone said it was a great warrior chief and his servants. In 2016, a reanalysis found there were 12 people, not 6. And the 2 central bodies were not 2 men. One was a woman. A century of confident interpretation, quietly rewritten by better measurements. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about who actually gets sacrificed. Nobody ever picks the king. Across every culture, every century, never the king. It is captives, servants, orphans, the poor, the foreign, and the very young. Which is a strange coincidence if the gods are the ones choosing. At Templo Mayor, researchers tested the chemistry locked inside victims' teeth. Teeth record the water you drank as a child, and water differs by region. Some of the people in the temple had grown up drinking someone else's water. They came from regions the empire had conquered, then quietly emptied of people. The sacrifice was not only a ritual, it was also a receipt. Proof in public that this city could take people from that city. Every person watching learns the same lesson without a single word spoken. Some people are the kind who watch, some people are the kind who are watched, and the line between them is drawn in blood, in front of everybody. That's not a metaphor. That is what a public execution is for, which is why the practice keeps appearing wherever people start stacking themselves in ranks. Small, flat, equal societies almost never do this. Big, layered ones do. Which brings us finally to the study that pulls the whole thing together. Now let's be honest, because this field gets things wrong constantly. Take Carthage on the North African coast and its famous infant burials. Thousands of urns, each holding the cremated remains of a very young child. Roman writers said the Carthaginians burned their own babies for the gods. The Romans also destroyed Carthage, so their testimony has an obvious problem. In 2010, one team examined the bones and said these were natural deaths. Infant mortality was brutal everywhere. A cemetery, they argued, not an altar. 3 years later, another team said the bone ages could not rule sacrifice out. They pointed at inscriptions, dedications, and a temple that took no other offering. As of today, that argument is not settled. Both sides are serious. And I would rather tell you that than pretend the bones speak clearly. Bones are evidence. They are not confessions. And they never explain themselves. Cahokia's warrior chief turned out to be a man and a woman together. The Aztec number turned out to be propaganda written by the winners. Wooly's peaceful poison turned out to be a spike, swung from behind. Every generation of archaeologists finds the last one was politely, confidently wrong. So hold the next part loosely. It is the best explanation we have. It is also the one that makes every site we just visited click together. There is one last thing I saved for the end, and it is the wildest part. In 2016, a team published a study in the journal Nature. They did not dig anything. They took 93 cultures and modeled their history. These were Austronesian societies, spread across the Pacific over thousands of years. Some were flat and equal. Some had chiefs. Some had rigid inherited castes. About 40 of the 93 practiced some form of ritual human sacrifice. The researchers asked a simple question. Which came first, sacrifice or hierarchy? Everyone assumes hierarchy came first, and then the sacrifices served the priests. The models said something else, and it took a while to sink in. Where sacrifice existed, societies were far less likely to slide back toward equality. The latter, once built, could not be pulled down again from below. Sacrifice also pushed those societies toward strictly inherited class systems. Not earned, not chosen, inherited. Your father's rank became your rank, permanently. Read that carefully because it inverts the whole story you were told. The gods did not demand the blood. The hierarchy demanded the blood. The gods were the paperwork. The altar was a machine for holding people down. Sacrifice was never the price of the gods. It was the price of the throne. And that explains why it is always the captive, never the king. Careful, though. This is a model, not a confession from the past. It shows sacrifice locking inequality in place, not creating it from nothing. But that distinction is small comfort if you are the one being locked. So step back out of the crowd and stand where you started. It is 1487, and nobody around you thinks they are cruel. They think they are holding the world together the way you think about taxes. Every society builds a story about why some people must be spent. Ours are quieter. Ours do not require anybody to climb the steps. But somebody, somewhere, is still standing at the bottom of the stairs. The archaeologists will dig us up one day and count what we spent. They will find our numbers and wonder which ones we invented. The knife was never the point. The stairs were always the point. Look up. Somebody is standing at the top. Somebody always is. More strange, true history about ancient humans is waiting right here.